let's do football at 4. John McMullen, a little football here. A lot of football news, by the way. The Eagles have brought in a couple of veterans, including bringing back Wiz. Wiz is back here. So John had wrote a story this weekend for 97.3 ESPN.com that the Eagles were searching for interior offensive line depth. They went and brought an old friend back, and some would say, how was he even available, Wiz? But they get Wiz back, and I guess that shows that they didn't feel very comfortable with their situation.
No, and I don't think it was a coincidence that the Eagles just went through rookie camp and got to see all the undrafted guys, and they probably took a step back and said, you know what, these guys aren't going to be ready. Stefan Wisniewski has not been signed. He's still on the street. Let's see if he wants to come back. And he did. So I think it's a very, very big positive for this team. I said it was the last really glaring weakness you can look at this roster and say there was an obvious need there. So it makes a lot of sense, and Wiz is back. And it's bigger than people understand, because that interior game day backup who can play all three positions kind of seamlessly is very, very important, because the last thing you want on the offensive line is a bunch of moving parts, and Jeff Stoutland talks about that all the time.
Right, so he essentially kind of comes back as that interior backup at multiple positions, and you would almost think now that that kind of solidifies that offensive line to where I think I saw you tweet this out, that the 53-man roster game is not going to be all that fun, because this team is very deep on paper.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of loaded, and you say things always go wrong in this league. So it doesn't mean much in May. Injuries are going to happen. So there are going to be unforeseen things. But if you look at this team on paper, it's tough to find a real weakness. And there's more depth here than certainly in most cities. And Cody Kessler is a part of that as well, who they also signed as a guy who started 12 games in this league. They wanted to bring in a veteran at some point to compete with Nate Sudfeld. I think they would have preferred it was a guy with a little bit more experience, but 12 games is a lot different than 25 passes, and that's where Nate Sudfeld is. So I think they're feeling pretty good about that as well.
Yeah, they did sign Cody Kessler, who started, 12 games in his career, 4 this year with Jacksonville, played with Cleveland, kind of overmatched in the game, but he was a guy who was a third-round pick, and maybe the Eagles feel like they get their hands on him, that they can develop him a little bit better. But it certainly adds more depth to a position that is very important, especially here, the backup quarterback spot.
Yeah, and if you look at all three guys, they were all from the same draft class: Carson Wentz, Cody Kessler, and Nate Sudfeld. Carson, obviously, number 2 overall. Cody, as you mentioned, was a third-round pick. Ironically, got with part of the haul the Browns received for Carson Wentz, and also Nate Sudfeld was a 6th-round pick that year. So everybody is from that year, and I think it is going to be a competition between Cody Kessler and Nate Sudfeld for the backup job. I think Clayton Thorson's going to be the third quarterback no matter what. So whoever loses that job, I don't think is going to be here between Nate Sudfeld and Cody Kessler.
Wow, yeah, that's kind of what I was going to get into with you, John, is there's no chance Kessler and Nate Sudfeld are in the same room together, in the quarterback room together once the season starts. Like, I'm just trying to figure out why bring him in there. Initially, I say, okay, good. I like Kessler in the room all year long with Carson and Nate, or just maybe put some pressure on Sudfeld in camp, but you think otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, things can always change. Clayton Thorson could go to training camp and look completely overmatched, and you might have to go in a different direction. I don't think the Eagles believe that's going to happen. He is a 5th-round pick. He is a guy that is going to be very difficult to get through waivers, if you want to think of it that way, and put on the practice squad. So ultimately, you've seen this Eagles team do it many times over the past few years, whether it was somebody like Jordan Mailata last year, keeping him on the 53, even Matt Pryor, who was on the roster the entire year but didn't play. Shelton Gibson, his rookie year, barely played, but they stashed him. They do those things because they don't believe they can get the guys through waivers and onto the practice squad. I ultimately think that will be the case with Clayton Thorson, and he'll be that third developmental quarterback. And that means these two guys are battling for one spot, and that's the backup to Carson Wentz, which has proven to be a very, very important position. Let's be honest. I don't think you can go into a season and assume Carson Wentz is going to play 16 games. You can hope for 13, 14. Best case scenario, he's completely healthy, but you have to be realistic about it as well.
So very early on here, but I see that there's some reports out that rookie running back Miles Sanders is already, loving a relationship with Deuce Staley. Talk about that connection and the running back room that Sanders is entering, and what can we expect leading up to the season with him and Deuce?
Well, everybody's happy.
Right.
Deuce tends to be very hard on players, so we'll see how that shakes out. He's very blunt. He's very forceful. He tells his players exactly what they need to do, and if you don't do it, you're going to be in his doghouse. I'm not saying Miles isn't going to do it. The Eagles have tremendous hopes for him. He's obviously going to start out projected to be the complementary back to Jordan Howard. So this is a complete makeover in that backfield. Two guys who weren't even here last year are designed to get most of the touches, and it's Jordan Howard and it's Miles Sanders. And now it's the back end of the roster is the guys the Eagles have had to count on in the past, whether it's people like Corey Clement or Wendell Smallwood or Josh Adams. The Eagles kind of got fed up with that and said we need to add talent to this running back room, and they were able to do it.
John McMullen, Football at 4, a lot of NFL stuff. Any reason in particular why Wiz was still available?
He's a veteran guy. Remember, his original contract was, I think, $3.7 million, which was an option year that the Eagles declined. A lot of money for a backup, number one. There's also the issue that Wiz thought he should have been a starter, was a starter in the Super Bowl year, kind of ping-pong back and forth. You remember Isaac Seumalo got benched. He finished the year as the starter at left guard. And he kind of spoke out and said he thought there was more to it than just performance when he was benched last year for Isaac. So he's kind of headstrong. He believes he should be a starter in this league. I think when he was released, he got out on the open market and saw that wasn't going to be there for him. And if he's going to be a backup, he'd rather be a backup here where he's got a good relationship with Jeff Stoutland and understands the system and has played at a high level when forced into action, at times at least.
Yeah, it's certainly, I mean, it's amazing. It's kind of like in a week in the NFL, it's like the difference between 5-3 and 4-4 is just so different. Yeah. The difference in having that one guy now changes the whole depth of that entire unit almost, because he can play, do so many different things.
Yeah, and that's the important, and that's the difficult part, is you have to be able to play all three of those interior positions and play them in a similar fashion. I think that's the real key. Sometimes you have a backup center who you put in at guard and hold your nose and try to get through it. In Wiz's case, not that he's great at any of them, because he's not. If he was, he'd be a starter in this league. But he's solid at all three positions. And that's all you can ask for in a league with a dearth of offensive linemen. Somebody who can play all three positions and do it rather seamlessly. There's not going to be a downgrade significantly when he's playing center to right guard or right guard to left guard. he's solid in all three, and it's rare to find that kind of player. And I'm surprised it took the Eagles this long to sort of grind their teeth a little bit and say, you know what, we need this guy. But I think they took a look at the younger players, and this happens a lot with this league. They get all excited, and you see all the draft people, and they say, this guy can play, and this guy can play, and this guy can play. And they get out on the field, and the coaches go, you know what? I don't want this guy playing. Let's get Wisniewski back, who understands how to play. And I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I know. You look around this team, and you kind of we've touched on it a little bit, but if we're in the season of trying to get that secondary guy or whatever's left, I mean, do you think Howie has a lot of work still, or does this look like that Howie can take the rest of the summer, enjoy his summer?
Well, I don't think he ever does that. It's just not his nature. I think there's still moves to be made. Maybe players leaving. We've talked about Big V, Halapoulivaati Vaitai. I don't see there being a spot for him on this team now that Andre Dillard's here and is going to take over that game day swing tackle role. We've still talked about potential moves with other veteran players. Something could happen, but as far as adding people, there's not much room. That's what I said. If you're looking at the 53-man roster and you're trying to look for surprises, it's tough to find them because there's just not jobs available. That's how deep this team is, and it's pretty impressive what he's been able to do.
I was reading something from NFL.com that was ranking the top offenses in the NFL, and they had the Eagles as the third best overall offense in the league. I mean, do you look at this team right now as one of the most explosive, scary offenses in football?
Yeah, I do, because of what they've added and how the pieces fit together. And then the biggest piece of all is the health of Carson Wentz. So there's plenty to be proven. But we're just at this stage, all you can do is look at things on paper and say, well, not only do the Eagles have a top-tier quarterback when he's healthy, they have proven receivers with Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, one of the greatest deep threats in the history of this game. Nelson Aguilar moves back to the position that he excelled in a couple years ago, the slot. You've got a tight end who, if he's not the best receiving tight end, he's right there with Travis Kelce and George Kittle. You got Dallas Goedert, who might be the best tight end two in this league now, at least projected to be. And now you have running backs as well, who at least they're not great. They're not Ezekiel Elliott. They're not Saquon Barkley, but they're a heck of a lot better than what was here last year. So you start to look at, well, if you're a defensive coordinator, who do you try to take away? And it becomes more difficult. So I think in a lot of ways, the biggest problem for Doug Peterson is keeping everybody happy. And that could be a bigger problem than people realize.
Yeah, getting Wentz to be 100%, I guess, is the next biggest question for this team, maybe this offseason, right? Has the mystery behind when he will be ready to let loose and be out there and end all the questions. We joked on, Friday or Thursdays, John, that he's becoming the Joel Embiid of –
I was just thinking that, dude.
Like, hey, when's this guy going to be cleared and when is he ready?
We talk about Embiid's health. We transition to Eagles talk right into Carson's health.
Yeah, and it's frustrating, and obviously 2 consecutive years. And while we talk about the depth of this team and how impressive it is, and I still think a Cody Kessler type is better than a lot of backups in this league because it's not easy to find a backup. But this particular organization had an embarrassment of riches at that spot, and they had the ability to withstand injuries to Carson Wentz. That no longer exists. So right off the bat, you can say how deep this team is. You can say what a great job Howie Roseman did in the offseason. But if Carson Wentz can't play, this team's not going to be very good.
Yep.
And So I can't put enough emphasis on making sure that he's completely healthy, completely ready to go. And if that means he's not throwing or he's not participating in OTAs on May 21st, who cares? But if he's still struggling as we get to minicamp, and worst case scenario, when training camp starts to get closer, then you start having some real questions and real concerns. I don't think that's going to happen, though. I think he's going to be fine for training camp and really fine for minicamp.
So what's next with the Eagles? What do they got coming up?
On-field OTAs, Phase 3, with the veterans, rookies, everybody together next week, May 21st. And there's 3 different weeks of that. And then you have minicamp, and then we're off and rolling towards training camp.
Gets here quickly.
Yeah, it does.
By the way, I guess before we let you roll, I wanted to give you a couple of minutes to pontificate on the demise of the Sixers season yesterday.
Well, at some point, you just got to tip your hat to to Leonard. I mean, that's one of the great shots in the history of this league. Game 7, walk-off, first time it's ever happened. Contested, over a 7'2" defender, hits the rim 4 times. Like I said, you just got to tip your cap. But I think when the Sixers step back, they'll realize they had a terrible night on the boards, particularly giving up offensive rebounds. And that was the top rebounding team in the playoffs. They didn't show up in that aspect. And then you had the 3 straight possessions, which went down to 0 on the clock. They didn't get legitimate shots up. I think they lose by that shot on the road, and they just didn't play that well. And that's going to haunt them for a long time because they should have won the basketball game. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah, the sad part is, and a lot of people don't like to be rational about things sometimes, that's just the nature, is, a lot of teams go through these painful losses before they finally learn how to win that game. And I think you saw the Sixers' younger players still not ready to win. And you saw it in Denver yesterday. I mean, Murray had an awful game after he had helped get them to Game 7. He wasn't ready for that moment. Even Jokic, who had been excellent for most of the time, did not have one of his better games yesterday. Yet, C.J. McCollum, a veteran who had lost a lot. I mean, those Portland teams lose every year early, and I think they finally got past that moment for them, and I hope the Sixers grow and learn from that.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it last week on the show. Anytime young players are in a Game 7 environment, especially one we talked about, I was hoping the game would be close. It certainly was. It was as close as you can get. It is a learning tool that they will, I imagine, and do learn from. But in the moment, it is disappointing because the things they do well, and particularly on the boards and allowing offensive rebounds to players like Kyle Lowry, that's just getting out hustled. And that part of it's disappointing to know. If you gave your typical effort, you probably win that game by 5 or 6, and Leonard's not even in position to send you home and disappoint you.
Frustrating way to lose. Just an ugly game yesterday. Aesthetically was not a great game, but a great close finish. But the Sixers have a lot of questions, and of course the coach at the top of the list. We'll keep our eyes on that and everything else as the Football at 4 with John McMullen. Follow him at JF McMullen on Twitter. Wisniewski's back with the Eagles. Good news on the football side of things. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, guys.